when I woke up, very confused. She said, "You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive."
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an IRONCLAD original. Welcome to On the X. I'm Chris Irwin, and today my guest is Remi Adeleke. Remi is a former Navy SEAL, an actor, and an author whose memoir, Transformed, chronicles his incredible journey from Nigeria to the Bronx to the SEAL teams and beyond. He also has a fiction novel called Chameleon, a black box thriller. He's been in feature films like Transformers, The Last Night, and Six Underground, and in TV shows like SEAL Team and The Terminal List. And he's a filmmaker, having written and directed The Unexpected, an exploration of the underground world of human organ trafficking. The story really is amazing, and I thoroughly enjoyed listening to it and discussing it with him here. So here we go with Remi Adeleke on the X. Let's kind of get into it here. I gotta say, I knew nothing about your story, and I listened to your book.
Cool.
I like listening, I think, to memoirs more than it's I mean, I sort of go back and forth with it based on time and stuff. And if I have a long drive in a car or a flight or something, it's certainly easier. Well, certainly it's easier to read or to listen to a book. But part of me used to feel like listening to a book was cheating, where it's like, well, I can't say I technically read the book, you know? But I think I feel like a memoir, especially, I almost prefer now to listen to it, especially if it's read by the author, because it's, and it should be if it's a memoir. It just makes it feel more personal. So that was true. I talked to Gary Sinise. I had listened to his book and listening to your book.
Oh, nice.
What a cool story, man.
Thank you.
So let's kind of I just want to unpack that a little bit, because I'm assuming most people aren't going to know it. So you were born in Nigeria. And how much of that, because you moved away when you were very young, but how much of that do you remember?
I have some pictures behind me, not on this table, but on a table behind me right now. And every time I look at those pictures, like flashes, and I get glimpses and memories that come back to me. So I do remember. I remember a significant amount of my time there, and specifically the upbringing that we had in Nigeria, just that lavish life of living on a compound. I have a good memory of the compound and some of the people that helped raise us, like like Jane, who was not only the maid, but she was also a nanny as well, and some other folks. So I would at the school. My very first memory was a fight that I got into as a kid in at the private school my father put me and my brother in, and we were being made fun of because my mom was American and my dad was obviously Nigerian. And I remember getting into a fight, and then my mom and dad came to school to pick us up, and because they got called to the school because of the fight. And I remember my dad just being so proud because I held my own, and it was my first fight, and he was just so proud. So I have memories of that. And I remember actually when I was writing the book, I wanted to go back to Nigeria to finish it out. And so when I got to the last chapter of the book, I was in Nigeria, and I went to my school, and I went to a few other places, and went to Victoria Island, went to my dad's island, Banana Island, and more memories started to come back to me. So I was able to then go back through the book, back to the beginning of the book, and kind of make some edits there, and definitely, edit out the last chapter, make it much better.
Yeah. How did your parents meet then? If your dad was Nigerian and your mom was American?
Yeah, my parents met at the Metropolitan Museum of Natural History. So my mom, she was always into the arts from the time she was a young girl, and she was always into museums and books and going to plays and so on and so forth. And she grew up in New York City, and New York City is it's big on the arts. Obviously, we know about Broadway, and we know about some of the great museums and art galleries out there. And so my mom would make it a habit to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Natural History depending on what exhibit was going on. and my dad was on the board of the World Trade Center in New York City.
Okay.
So he would always be in New York for business. And so while he was there one month, he saw that there was going to be an art exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Natural History, specifically focused on Yoruba art. And we're Yoruba, so my last name Adeleke. Ade means crown, Leke means is supreme, and my first name is actually Ade Remi, which means the crown has appeased me. And so, that's all Yoruba. All right, it's not. There is no Nigerian language. It's Yoruba, Igbo,
right,
Hausa, it's
right.
tribal languages,
Yep,
right?
yep.
And so, my dad went to the Metropolitan Museum, and he went to this exhibit, and my mom happened to be there, and they were both staring at a piece of Yoruba art, and then they greeted each other, and then went their separate ways, and then they found each other a few minutes later, and then staring at another piece of art, and they decided to exchange phone numbers, and they ended up getting married 5 months later.
Wow.
And then after that, my mom decided to move to Nigeria with my dad. So I tell people all the time, my mom and dad's story is the real coming to America story.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, right? You read your story, and it really is. I mean, one of your chapters is called "Coming to America," obviously.
Yeah.
But like, it does feel like that when you listen to it or read it. It's like this guy's like a real life sort of part coming to America, part Black Panther, part, like this really cool kind of confluence of these things. And I know that people have have kind of made that analogy as well. So I want to get into that a little bit more too, because your dad you sort of mentioned this, you were born into like upper class, right? Like, well, I don't know if it would be considered wealth, but your dad was a chief, right? And
he was a chief,
hearing that, I don't even know exactly what that means. So what does that mean? Like, what was his position and role, and like, how did that impact obviously you and like your upbringing there? And I'm curious too, like how this piece of your life, because it was small. I think you left when you were like 5 or something.
5,
like that,
87,
right? So I'm curious about how that shaped your view of it, like your worldview, that piece of your life.
It didn't shape my worldview until a lot later in life. But going back to what a chief is. So in Western culture, we refer to royalty as king, queen, prince, princess, Dutch. But in a lot of African culture, even in Middle Eastern culture, and also here in America, in Indian culture, Native American culture, the head of a clan or the head of a tribe, royalty was referred to as chief, and it is referred to even to this day as chief. So my grandfather, and there's in Yoruba, we have the Oluwolu, which is essentially the supreme king, like they consider him the god of humanity, right? But we will refer to him as like the king of kings of the Yoruba. And then under the Oluwolu, and the Oluwolu still exists. I forgot who's the current Oluwolu now, but under him, there are chiefs who are essentially little kings. The Oluwolu is the big king, but then you have chiefs that are little kings in the Yoruba tribe, and your last name is essentially your title. So even now, I fast forward a little bit. I remember when I was on, I can't remember if I wrote this in a book. I might be wrong, but I remember being on a ship and with the Marines, and I remember standing in line in the chow hall, and 2 Nigerian guys walked past me, and they stopped and doubled back, and they started speaking to me in Yoruba. Because they, as you know, in the military, we wear our last names. We have our, U.S. Navy on one side, and last name on the other side, and they start speaking to me in Yoruba, and I couldn't answer them back. And these were guys who probably went from Nigeria to the U.S. and was like, "Hey, I want to get U.S. citizenship, so I'm jumping in the Navy." And they said, "How could you not? You are an Adeleke. You are an Adeleke. How can you not speak your native tongue of Yoruba? You are Adeleke. Your dad is that." And so it's our names are really widely recognized. And so it kind of goes back to my grandfather. So my father's father was a very prominent chief, hence his last name. And he had 9 wives. And of the 9 wives, they kept on producing daughters. And so my father was the firstborn son to my grandfather. So he inherited the title of chief, Chief Adeleke, Chief Adebayo Adeleke, to be more specific. And then my grandfather ended up dying when my father was about 8 or 9 years old. And all of the wives and kids spread out through Nigeria. And so my dad ended up going down to the south towards Lagos, and he wasn't wealthy, so he didn't have uh, a lot of the wealth wasn't passed down to all of the kids for some reason. I can't explain why. I don't know that much of my history as to what happened with my grandfather's brothers and so on and so forth. I don't know the story behind everything, but for some reason, nothing was really passed down to my father. And so the good thing is that when he got to Lagos, there were Christian missionaries there. And not only did they teach the Bible, but they also taught math and science and literature and all of these different topics that are taught in Western schools. And my dad was able to memorize absolutely everything. Matter of fact, he had memorized the Quran before he was like 8 years old. He had memorized the Quran, so he was a savant, and very brilliant guy. And so he ended up getting a full ride academic scholarship to study architecture and engineering into London University. Went there. And then that's when he started kind of like rebuilding his empire. He started rebuilding it in the West. As I mentioned, he was on the board of the World Trade Center. He was on the board of the British Financial Planning Council in Great Britain. And these were all titles that my dad kind of worked his way up into. And then he started a couple of engineering firms, and he was just really, really successful. And then when he came back to Nigeria, interestingly, when he came back to Nigeria, I want to say in the 70s, that's when everybody showed him his respect. Because here was this guy that kind of rebuilt this empire, this financial empire that had been lost. And he went to the West and did it. Now he was coming back, returning the king type situation.
Yeah.
And so he had a lot of stature and people. Nigeria is very, in my opinion, a lot of Nigerians and Nigeria in general is a very superficial culture. Like a lot of the people often, really look at the nice car, the nice house, the title, the government officials. Like that's something that's, held in high esteem as it relates to the general public. And so because of my dad's success, that's when they really recognized his title a lot more. So fast forward though, my dad ended up engineering one of the first man-made islands in the world, Banana Island. There was a lot of corruption. You haven't read the book, you know the whole story, but there was a lot of corruption at the time, and the Lagos state government came in after my dad had essentially purchased the swamp from the federal government, and they said the federal government was never supposed to sell him this body of water, and they ended up kind of taking it from him. And my dad had invested millions of dollars. I mean, he had hired Dutch engineers to dredge the foreshore to turn this water into an island, and he had leveraged all of our assets, our compound, just our art, everything, in this project, because he knew that it would net him millions of dollars. And I don't think he would have guessed that it would net him billions of dollars, because now the island by itself, with how all of the properties on it, is worth billions of dollars. And so when he started fighting them in court, he started getting death threats, and a few weeks later, he ended up getting bit by a dog, and went to the hospital to go get some medication. Eventually took the medication, and in the autopsy, he was essentially poisoned. So the medication he was given was poison, and that's what ultimately killed him. And then my dad's bodyguard ended up getting installed as the manager of the island. So there were a lot of people in my dad's inner circle that backstabbed him, and to this day, that guy is still the manager of Banana Island, which is worth billions of dollars. And so getting to the last part of your question, when I came to New York City, came to the Bronx, and my mom did a really good job of masking the reality of what had happened. But I remember as I got older and I started kind of straying away from what my mom was trying to teach us and expose us to, and I was becoming a student of the streets and hip hop culture and all of these negative things. My mom she was very astute, so she noticed, and she would always pull me and my brother aside to remind us, hey, this is who you are. Your last name is, your name Remi means this, your name Adeleke means this. Like, you are not these people in the streets of the Bronx. You are not destined to be a drug dealer. You are not destined to be in gangs and do all of this foolishness. That's not who you are. You are an Adeleke, and you need to live up to your name. So that's kind of when it really began to make sense to me, because my mom would constantly pepper me and my brother with that talk.
Yeah. I didn't pick up on the, when I listened to the book, I must have gotten this wrong. I had thought that your dad had died. He got bit by a dog and had rabies, right? Like, he contracted rabies. And I thought that's even like the medicine hadn't worked, but did someone deliberately poison him with the?
Yeah. So when he got bit by the dog, but he didn't, it wasn't known as to whether he contracted rabies.
Okay.
So what he was essentially given was a prophylaxis, like a way to prevent it.
Okay.
And it was like, I don't know the exact name of it, but it was like an anti, rabies type medication to take, to prevent it from spreading.
Yes.
And that was what was laced with some nefarious items, and that's what ultimately killed him. So the autopsy, which we still have to this day, shows that that the medication that he was given was essentially poison, and that's what essentially stopped his heart and killed him.
Wow.
And he took it right before he went to go take his bath. And the maid set the bath for him. He went in. She came out after she set the bath in the master bedroom. He went in, never came out. So she found him the next day in the bathtub. He had been dead for 4 hours.
Was anybody held accountable for that eventually?
No, nobody ever was. I mean, Nigeria is it's a very corrupt country. It's consistently ranked as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And so no, and a lot of government officials who were my father's friends, they all got pieces of the island in the long run. There's a guy who's still alive to this day. I think he's in his early 90s. His name is General Dungy. And General Dungy was one of my dad's friends, and he ended up getting a piece of the island as well. And he never did anything to help. My half brother, who ended up fighting after my father died, he became a lawyer and ended up fighting the Nigerian government. He didn't do anything to help him. A lot of the government officials who were good friends with my dad didn't do anything to help my half brother. In fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, the Nigerian government offered my half brother $10 million. They wanted to settle for $10 million because essentially my dad had paid 10 million pounds, 8 million pounds to be exact, 8 million pounds in the 1970s for the for Maricold, and then he was essentially given a swamp in compensation for Maricold. And so they upped it from 8 million pounds to 10 million pounds. And my brother turned it down because you adjust for inflation. And then also, not just the value of the island, but the value of the dredging, the foreshore, and all of the stuff that he did. It's worth billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, there was this End SARS campaign. So in around 2019, 2020, and SARS was like a specialized police force in Nigeria. And so there were a lot of riots and protests during this time. And there was a courthouse in Lagos that had files, hundreds of boxes of files of my father's case. Not hundreds of boxes, but hundreds of papers in a box that constituted my father's case. And apparently protesters went into this specific courthouse and burned just this box. Not all of the boxes, not all of the other cases from, going decades back, but just this box. And so the entire kind of case went up in flames. And this is after my brother had turned down to $10 million. Wow. So speaking to the corruption, yeah, there's a lot of people in the government that's in on it. And I'll say this last thing too. Interestingly, my I I get contacted from different people to do business in Nigeria because I own a consulting company, and I also own a production company, and so I get contacted as soon as they realize who I am, they realize who my father was, they kind of slowly walk away,
Oh, wow.
you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
No,
So I've noticed that a lot over the years.
wow. Now you, I mean, you said here, and it's in the book where you at this, when this kind of happened, you were already in the Bronx. Were you not though, like the heir apparent or whatever in terms of your dad being the chief? Wouldn't that be was that not part of the equation at all?
No, no, my brother, so my half brother, because my dad he was married years before he met my mother, and then he got divorced.
Mhm.
And then my older half brother, John, who he's was raised in the UK. All my older half siblings, John, David, and Janine, they all were sent to boarding school in the UK as soon as they were turned like 8 or 9 years old.
Okay.
And so they were all raised in the UK, but they would go back and forth between the UK and Nigeria. And so John is technically
Okay. Okay.
the chief. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So you
Yeah.
come to the US, you're young, you're still like what, 5 or
Mhm.
6 years old or something like that, right?
5.
And
5.
then
Yeah.
you talk about, you mentioned there how you were engaged in some nefarious things.
Yeah.
Even the opening chapter of the book, you're talking about basically running
Yeah.
a cell phone scam,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious because you have such an interesting story because you started off in such a position of privilege and then went to
Mhm.
this position of not having it at all.
Yeah.
And I'm
Mhm.
curious as you reflect on that as an adult, like being put into that situation of a completely different environment and that upbringing, like when you reflect back on that, how much of that do you think you had a choice in, I guess? Like, you know what I mean? And then
Mhm.
you were then able to break out of it eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it certainly took some work. I mean, you talk about
Yeah.
having to pass high school by writing a
Yeah.
50-page paper in
Yeah.
one night and
Yeah.
things like that,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
so like, I guess what was the switch that flipped for you
Mhm.
and to kind of break you out of that? Because so many people I think are in that situation too, and maybe feel like, there's no way out of
Yeah.
turn into this,
I
right? And I'm stuck with it, that kind of thing.
Y- Yeah, to answer the first part of your question, I truly believe that everybody always has a choice. I had choices. My mother had given me, set me and my brother up so that we have choice. And I think the evidence in that was my brother, because my brother, he went down a completely different route. I mean, instead of hanging out in the streets, like he was in a library.
Mm,
Ever, I mean, from the time we were small, he would be in a library and just studying and reading books and doing homework. And when he got out of school, he didn't come home. He went to the library,
mm,
and then he would come back home, and then he would do more homework, and then he would go to sleep, wake up, and go back to school. And that was a choice that he made. That was a conscious choice that he made, despite the environment that we were in. We both grew up in the same neighborhood and same house, and he decided to make a better choices than I did. And then he ended up getting a full ride academic scholarship to study engineering, just like my father at Syracuse University. And then he ended up getting not just a scholarship to get his bachelor's, but he also got a scholarship to get his master's. So he got his bachelor's in electrical engineering and his master's in computer science engineering. And that all came out of the choices that he made, which were choices that my mom, put in front of us. Interestingly, one thing that my mother would do from the time we were young is she would save her pennies, or however much money she could save, and we would jump on the train or jump in the cab, and we would go downtown in Midtown Manhattan, and she would make us dress up in like a nice collared shirt and some nice pants, and she would take us to a nice restaurant, and in order to show us, hey, like, this is where you guys belong, this is how you act, you pull a chair out for them before you sit down, like, this is the fork that you eat with, this is the spoon that you start with, and this is what the knife is for, you don't suck your fingers, you know what I mean, like all of these different, and she exposed us to so much. When she could, she would take jobs at art galleries and museums just so that we could go for free. right? And so she wanted to do this so that we saw that our world wasn't just Fordham and Sedgwick, which was this cross street we grew up in the Bronx, so that we could see that the world was a lot bigger than just the Bronx. Because I remember as a kid, like especially as I got to my teen years, I never thought I would leave the Bronx. And there are a lot of people I grew up with and grew up around and went to high school with who have never left the Bronx, right? Who have never seen
Sure.
the beach with
Yeah.
their own two eyes, right? Who have never ventured into New Jersey or gone down to Florida, or definitely never left the country. And so, my mother wanted to expose us to all of these different things so that we could see that we had choices. We could see that the world was a lot bigger than what we assumed it was. And so I just want to kind of throw that out there first, and I bring this up, and that question is fresh in my mind because I was just having a conversation um a couple days ago with a good friend of mine. Actually, I met him when I was in the SEAL teams, and I met him through his mother, because his mother was very despondent because he had just got sentenced he just got put in jail. He was about to go to prison for a number of years. And I remember going to the jail in San Diego, and I was in my uniform and everything. And I remember sitting across the glass from him, and he was just so hard and so brainwashed by the streets like I was, that when he saw me, he sat down and he knew that his mother had sent me to just talk to him. He sat down, picked up the phone, looked at me, and then he hung the phone back up and walked out of the meeting room. And so me and him were texting. He's out of prison now. Life is completely turned around. And his son now is following the same path that he followed. And his son is 19 now. And he's out selling drugs. He's with the gangs here in San Diego doing all of this stuff. He's making his rap music and talking about killing people and all of this stuff. And my buddy was blaming him. So I was like, you can't blame yourself, man. I said, he has choices. Like he can make he's choosing to stay in that life, even though he's never really lived that life. He's making the conscious choice to live that life. He has a choice to get out of that life and do something positive, but he's choosing not to. And so you can't blame yourself. And I get so upset with people, especially people from communities I grew up in, who always make this excuse, like, this is all I have, this is all I know. No, it's not. It's not. It's all you want to know, So what eventually got me out of doing the nefarious things I was doing was I got involved in a deal with this drug dealer, sold them a bunch of phones. They were supposed to last for 90 days. I break down the whole story in the book. But they only lasted for a fraction of that time, and my life was threatened. And my mother happened to be in her bedroom when I was threatened in the living room in our apartment. And that was a huge wake-up call for me, because my mom would discipline me and my brother when we were kids. And one thing that instilled in me, when I say discipline, I mean with the belt. And one thing that instilled in me was this concept of consequences for actions. And so I always knew that there would be a consequence for whatever action I carried out. When I was selling drugs, I always knew that if I get caught, I'm going to prison or I'm going to jail. Or if I sell drugs on the wrong block, I can end up getting into a war and end up getting killed. Like I always knew that, and I think that that's another issue we have in the current age we're living in now, where kids have never learned the concept of consequence for action. So you get a lot of young people, even adults, who just make these brash decisions without even considering that there would be a consequence. And one thing I always counted the cost. I always knew what I was doing was wrong. And I always knew that if I get caught, that there would be a harsh consequence. So fast forward to this, and that came from the way my mom disciplined me and my brother every time we did something wrong, whether it was breaking the coffee table, whether it was fighting, whether it was cursing, whatever it was. When we got popped, I always knew that when we did that, I always knew that something would come. So when that situation happened with the drug dealer who I sold the phones to, that was my proverbial spanking. That was the consequence, which it could have been a lot harsher, because there were people who were doing the same thing I was doing, and they were getting caught, prosecuted, and sent to federal prison. So it could have been that harsh. But
Yeah.
instead it was, hey, give me my money or I'm going to kill you. And so
Yeah.
it was easy for me because I was like, all right, here's a bunch of money right now. I'll get you the rest tomorrow. Got him the rest tomorrow. And that's when I said, okay, I'm leaving this business. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm just not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So
And
that
then,
was it.
and then what made you go towards the military eventually?
Yeah. So, I just backing up. Well, I'll start here. I would say God, just to be simple, about it. I remember that situation with the drug dealer happened in December of 2001. And then fast forward to June of 2002, I had been doing nothing for 6 months. And I just remember laying in my bed and I heard this voice tell me, you need to get out of here. You need to join the military. And I remember propping myself up in the bed after hearing it because it was early in the morning when I heard this voice. I remember propping myself up in the bed and looking around. I didn't see anybody and the TV wasn't on in my room. Went to my window. I didn't hear anybody having a conversation about joining the military. And I just felt the voice so strongly. And I just remember after hearing it, I started to argue with this idea of joining the military because I didn't want to. I hated the military. I hated the government. I was very anti-police. And I associated anybody in a uniform as the police, whether you were a firefighter, whether you were a soldier, whether you were a Marine, whatever you were, whether you were a paramedic, you were the police to me. I didn't like the American government. I was totally brainwashed, by street culture, just like a lot of young people are to this day. And so to join the military was totally contrary to who I was and everything I stood for. And I didn't like wearing uniforms. I remember making fun of the kids and the ROTC in my high school wearing the tight, uniforms and they were all fitted and I just hated all of it. But after wrestling with the voice and the thought for, I would say about 10 minutes, I finally looked around my room and I was just like, okay, you're 19, about to turn 20 in 2 months. What else are you going to do with your life? Like, what else has your life amounted to? It's amounted to absolutely nothing. And that's when I said, okay, let me give it a shot. So I got dressed and ran down the street I grew up on and Fordham Road, went to the recruiter's office on Fordham Road and Grand Course Avenue, and the rest is history.
Did September 11th have anything to do with it? I mean, the time frame you're
No,
talking about is, I mean, you're in New York. It's right around that
yeah.
time.
Yeah, interesting. I watched the towers come down. I remember it was a girl who I was dating at the time, and she lived in a building about 2 or 3 buildings down from me, and buildings were 17 floors. So I remember when she called me up and she said, "Come to my roof." So I met her on the roof of her building, and her cousin worked in Windows of the World, so she was trying to get a hold of her cousin. Couldn't get a hold of her cousin. We watched the towers come down from
Wow.
the roof, and I remember being angry. I remember being very, very angry by it because I always hated bullies. I mean, that was one thing and that was why I stayed away from gangs. I hated gangs. I thought people in gangs were cowards because I would watch, 3, 4, 5 people beat up one kid,
Yeah.
and I remember I got jumped. I shared a story in my book about getting jumped. And I always hated the idea of multiple people beating on one person. And so that's what gangs did. And so I hated gangs. I hated bullies. And what I saw was the ultimate act of a bully picking on somebody. And I just remember being very angered, but still it didn't move me to join the military. I was so focused on doing the illegal things that I was doing and making money and making it in the music industry, which was my goal at the time, that, joining the military to get a vengeance was nowhere near my radar.
Yeah.
So, I can honestly say that it didn't have an effect on me joining. For me, it was more about when I went to go join, I think it was more about self-preservation. It was either I get out of here or I end up dead or in prison.
On the X is proudly presented by Mechanics Wear. Known for their durability and comfort, Mechanics Wear gloves are made from top quality materials offering protection against impacts, cuts, and abrasions. They feature advanced breathability and moisture-wicking technology to keep hands cool and dry during any task. Designed with precision, these gloves provide a secure grip and flexibility, helping users work more efficiently and safely. They've certainly been my personal go-to glove for decades. Mechanics Wear gloves are available at most retailers, on mechanicswear.com, and on GSA Advantage. It was not an easy, not an easy road for you. I mean, even to start, you talk about this woman, the recruiter in the Navy recruiter's office, who really went to bat for you to get you to, right? I mean, because you had some warrants out for your arrest.
Yep, 2 warrants. Yep,
and went to 2 courts.
Yep,
2 judges, and basically said, "Hey, I'm vouching for this guy," and did a whole bunch of other stuff to sort of set you up. Like, "Hey, give you sort of the inside scoop." So just talk about that real quick, because I think it's one of those things where, I don't know, the value of the people that you come across in your life making a difference like that, like how impactful one person can be in what's kind of like what would be considered a routine thing, right? This somebody who's doing this every day. They're seeing people all the time. And did this for you with really no reward for her. No, like, hey, I'm going to get something in return here at all. I just thought it was really an amazing thing. This person, and she's not with us anymore.
No. She was, and I didn't know this until later, but she was dying when I met her, because she died, I want to say 2 years after she snuck me into the Navy. But I went into the recruiter's office, and I told her I wanted to be a SEAL. And she laughed at me. And she had me take the practice ASVAB test, passed that, but definitely didn't score high enough to get into SEAL training. Scored high enough to get in the Navy, but not high enough to get into SEAL training. And then she ran my background and discovered I had 2 warrants, one in New Jersey, one in New York. And I got up and ran towards the door, and she yelled at me. She was from New York City, so she had a thick Bronx accent. She grew up in the Bronx. And she yelled at me and said, "Where you going?" And I said, "I'm getting out of here." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because there's nothing here for me." And I was terrified because, as I mentioned earlier, there were people who were doing the exact same cell phone scam I was doing that got caught and went to federal prison. So I didn't know what the warrants were for. And interestingly, the headquarters for the company that I was essentially stealing the cell phones from, the headquarters was in New Jersey. So when she said I had a warrant in New Jersey, I was like, holy crap, like, that's it, I'm done. And so she asked me, she said, do you have a suit? I said, no. She said, "Do you have a collared shirt and some nice pants?" I said, "I'm sure I could find something." She said, "Come back tomorrow." And I said, "For what?" And she snapped at me, said, "Just come back tomorrow." And I came back the next, and backing up for a second, growing up in the Bronx, you had, especially when you're selling drugs and cell phone scams, all the different things I was doing, you really learn how to read people. You have to learn how to read people in order to survive, because you need to know, is this person an undercover cop, or is this person somebody who I should be selling to? Is this person want to kill me, or is this person? You have to really learn how to read people. Just even put the drug dealing and all that stuff aside. Just walking down the streets of the Bronx, you have to have some emotional intelligence, because if not, you can end up getting knocked out, robbed. You have to know, okay, it's time for me to leave this train station and this train, I forgot what it was called, cabin, and go to the next train cabin, because something's about to go down in here, right? And so the one thing that I was able to utilize that when she said what she said to me, because I didn't know exactly what she was going to do for me, but based off of her reaction and what I read from seeing her reaction, whatever it was going to be good. She didn't mean me any harm. She wasn't going to turn me in the next day. And so I came back, and she was in her dress uniform, and she took me to both judges, a judge in New Jersey, judge in New York, and she advocated on my behalf. And the key thing that she said to them was, though people make mistakes, that doesn't mean that they don't have potential. And that's something that sticks with me to this day. And another important thing that I got out of that situation was the importance of not just giving other people a first, second, third chance, but giving ourselves a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chance, because nobody is harder on me than me. I'm sure nobody's harder on you than you. We are often very, very hard on ourselves, and we always have to be willing to give ourselves these multiple chances and keep pushing through. And that was the key lesson I got out of that. Two key lessons: one, though people make mistakes, that doesn't mean that they don't have potential. And two, you have to be willing to give other people multiple chances and give yourself multiple chances. And that's something that I apply to this day in everything that I do. But yeah, she did that, and then she went a step further and fudged the paperwork, and essentially was able to kind of sneak me into the Navy under the radar, and got my record cleared like super, super fast. And yeah, man. I remember she gave me this speech when she dropped me off at the airport, and she said, "All right, remember, like, your record, you never had a record, you never did anything.
Yeah,
There's gonna
yeah,
be this thing
yeah.
called moment of truth." She's like, "You never did anything bad." And I was like, yeah. She's like, don't throw me under the bus. I was like, "I'll never throw you under the bus." And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into the Navy. But yeah, then she died 2 years later. Her daughter's birthday was yesterday. And her daughter's become like a daughter to me. She calls me
Oh,
dad.
wow.
So I was able to kind of take her daughter under my wing, and because her father was never really in her life. And so yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to the story how I was able to
Of
reconnect with
course.
the family. But yeah, I'm very, very close with with my recruiter Tiana's mother, with her father, with her brother. I just messaged with her brother earlier today, and her daughter's become like my daughter.
Why do you think she did that for you? Did it feel to you like she does that for a lot of people, or did she sort of single you out?
Well, I truly believe it was God's timing, and I say this because if I didn't obey that voice when I did, I would have probably ran into another recruiter and it'd been a completely different
Sure.
situation. And I say this because I meet young people all the time who have read my book or who've heard my story, and they say to me, "Hey, can you get me into the Navy? Do you know somebody who can get me in the Navy? Like, I made this mistake. I have this small little misdemeanor. Or, I have this small little thing that I did years ago, and no recruiter won't touch me. I went to a recruiter and I've been blacklisted, and every recruiter." And I just tell them, I was like, "You just got to meet that one recruiter that's willing to take a risk on you like that. Like, there's no magic pill that I could give you that's going to fix the situation." And, you know, the first recruiting office I went into was the Marine Corps recruiting office.
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember that from the
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
And there
yeah,
was
yeah.
nobody there.
There's nobody
There
there.
was
Yeah,
nobody.
yeah.
I sat there for 15 minutes. No one showed up. If that person showed up, I'd have been in a bad spot. But then, when I went into the Navy recruiter's office, she just happened to be in there by herself. There was no other Navy recruits. I truly believe in divine timing. And then, to answer your question more specifically, when I met her brother, because I didn't know that she died until I got out of the
Yep.
military.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't know that she died until I started writing the book. Until I finished the book, actually, because I finished the book and I was like, you know what, I need to find her so that she could see how what she did for me paid off. And that's when I found out that she had died. And it's a freaking crazy story how it all happened. But I was actually flying to Atlanta to go to court to stand next to this kid and ask the judge to be lenient instead of sending the kid to prison because he was an adult. Actually, he was 18. Send him to this horse training camp where he could work with wild horses and kind of be rehabilitated through this horse, essentially, like, so he could see how it is to try and tame a wild horse, because he was that wild horse. It was this interesting camp. And on my way to fly out to Atlanta to stand next to this kid in front of the judge, I got this thought, let me try and just start Googling Tiana, trying to find somebody connected to her. And I got this phone number and I called it, and it was for this catering service. And this lady answered, and I was like, "Hey, are you related to Tiana?" She's like, "That's my cousin." And I said, "Is there any way you could connect me with her mom or dad or whoever?" And she said, "Yeah, her brother lives in Atlanta." And then I told her, I said, "Hey, my plane's about to take off, so I don't have much time." She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Atlanta." She said, "Her brother just moved to Atlanta." I said, "He did?" She was like, "Yeah." So anyway, she called him up. By the time I landed in Atlanta, I went and met up with him, and we stayed up. I stayed up super late. Made it to court the next day in time. But the point of the story is, she told me all about Tiana and how she would drive around the Bronx in her government vehicle after she became a recruiter, and she would look for drug dealers, and she would look for guys who, were on the verge of getting in big trouble, and say, hey, come with me and let me put you in the military. In fact, her brother told me that he had gotten a misdemeanor for charge, and she was not a recruiter yet, but she was stationed on a ship in Italy, and she flew all the way back to New York City and took him to the Air Force recruiter's office, and was able to work some magic to get him into the Air Force recruiter. And so this was something she did. She was like a Robin Hood, so to speak, when she
amazing.
would go do this. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just, it's something I've always loved about the military. Is just like,
Yeah.
for almost everybody,
Mhm.
it's an option, and can be a great option, right? Regardless of your upbringing, or where you've come from, or anything like that, that can just set you up for, like, teach you things, and like show you like, do so much for you. Coming out of that situation, did you feel like you had like a second lease on life? Was this like, oh my gosh, like this slate's been wiped clean, and now I've got to make good on this opportunity? Did it feel like that to you?
Yes and no. Yes. A part of me was like, you know what? This is a second chance. I can't screw this up. I can't bring my mess from my past into this new opportunity. Need to be highly respectful, need to be highly motivated, need to be on time. I need to do my job, because I didn't want to do anything that would have kind of pissed on the opportunity that my recruiter gave me. Right. I wanted her to eventually see that her bet on me paid off exponentially. And I knew that in order for me to do that, I had to be on the straight and narrow. So yes, from that perspective. No, from the perspective, I was terrified. I was scared to death. I mean, every time I got called into even when I was in the SEAL teams, every time I got called into the office for something, I was like, oh, this is where they're gonna find out that I did have a record. I did do these things. Like, something happened. I remember when I was filling out my information for my TSSCI clearance, and I was mortified. Every time I got a phone call, hey, I thought, all right, this is the call where they're gonna pull me in. Or when the Master Chief said, hey, come into my office, I was like, all right, this is it. So, for a number of years, I was terrified, so I didn't feel like I had a new lease on life because of the mistakes that I had made in my past.
Obviously, that's not the case anymore, though. You talk about this
Yeah.
publicly. You wrote about it.
Yeah. Now I can, because I'm out the military. I got honorably discharged, right? So, so at this point, I don't mind. But at the time when I was in, I was scared to death. I was scared. Yeah. The entire 13 years I was in.
So I mean, like, from that point on, though, it was not smooth sailing at all. Like, this was like a situation where you basically, you get in, you're a corpsman for a bit. You started working at a naval hospital. You can't do a lot of the stuff that's required for buds. Like, you could barely swim, if at all.
Yeah.
And you sort of lit a fire under your ass. You met again another, like a guy that would help you out there and kind of teach you how to swim, right?
Lieutenant Colonel Murray.
Put in all this work, get to buds, and then get rolled a few times. You have to get dropped eventually, because you can't pass some of the stuff. You go back into the fleet, so to speak, and do some deployments there, make it back. I mean, how many, but you were in like, what, 5 buds classes, 4 or 5?
So it's 2. I was in 250 was my first one. Got med rolled in Hell Week for the pneumonia site. Started with 251. Restarted with 251. Got rolled after Hell Week, 2 classes for swims. So started back up with 253. And then after 253, that's why I got dropped in dive phase, made it through first phase, got to dive phase, got dropped in 253. So then came back with 266, got all the way to third phase, got rolled in third phase, and finished with 267. So 5 classes.
But that's an amazing amount of tenacity, which you would expect, certainly for people that can, anyone that passes that training. However, that's tenacity, man, to stay with it. So what kept you going through all that? Was it just like, I don't know, what was it? What kept you?
I knew that I could make it. I mean, I knew, especially with what happened when I made it through first 3 weeks of first phase in 250, and then Hell Week, and how destroyed my body was. I had pneumonia, cyp, rhabdo, and just once I kind of fell out and then woke up in the ICU. And that's when I was like, all right, I know if I had an unequivocal doubt I could make it. I know I could do this because my body was destroyed. And then I remember when I got back to Buds after getting released from the hospital, Master Chief Hoffman and Senior Chief Fortin, they came into, well, she was Chief Fortin at the time. They came into into the barracks in I think it was 617 to 618. And they said, hey, that's what we look for in a SEAL. We look for a guy who's, beaten down, shot up, and he's still going. And, they apologized. That we didn't know that you were that sick. We thought you were fake. And the deal going through Buds, you get people who are,
Sure.
who say they're sick because they don't want to quit, but they're not really sick. And they thought that was me. And they realized that no, this dude was actually almost died. And after that speech from Master Chief Hoffman and Chief Fortin, that gave me even more confidence. And so I breezed through first phase. That second time it sucked. I breezed through it, and then breezed through Hell Week. And it sucked, but still breezed through it. And those were 2 winter Hell Weeks too. Those were both in the winter time, and it was a kick in the nuts. But I would say that's when I was just like, I know I could do this.
Yeah,
I know I could do this.
There's an interesting piece, like almost like a switch, I would say, in your story, which.
Yeah.
So first of all, you have kind of for lack of a better term, a religious conversion of sorts.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the way here. I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but I kind of want you to talk about what brought that about. But it also, I think when I was listening to it, coincided a little bit with, I would say you went from somebody who it seemed, and I think you would say this, that you had a little bit of a chip on your shoulder to someone that was a lot more humble. And I think those things happened sort of concurrently. I don't know if one fostered the other in a certain order, but I'm just kind of curious about what brought that about for you.
Yeah, I think, after I got dropped from Buds, that was very humbling. that was very, very humbling. Because I was in dive phase and just it was crushing, and it was all my fault, because I was out partying on the weekend instead of going to remediation and doing stuff I shouldn't have been doing. So it was a gradual humbling, and then being with the Marines, man, that was with the grunts, man. I mean, I remember we went out for a training exercise out to Mojave Desert, Mojave Viper, and we drove this truck out to the middle of the desert, and our sergeant was like, all right, get out. Got out, and it was like, all right, this is where we're sleeping. And we had no like pads. We had no pads. We had no nothing. We had to sleep on rocks. And then that was eye-opening for me. I was like, wow, this is really, really humbling. This sucks, man. This is a kick in the nuts. And it's like they just drop a bunch of Marines off in the middle of the desert and says, all right, survive. We'll see you in a few days. And that was humbling. And then, and then getting back to Buds and having to start all over again, that was another level of humbling. And then got into a relationship. And I would say, once I made it through third phase and I was in this relationship, I would say that pride started to rise back up in me again. And it kind of it manifested itself in the way I treated this girl I was dating. And I was just being a dirtbag, cheating on her, just doing a bunch of stuff I shouldn't have been doing. And this woman kind of loved me. And then I broke my ankle, man. I broke my ankle in jump school. And that messed up. I split my medial malleolus in half and couldn't walk for 4 months. And this girl who would treat me, she treated me like a god. I mean, she would come clean my house, bring me food, leave her dog with me to keep me company. And I was so angry, not just by what had happened in the military, but what had happened throughout my life, just how, and there was nobody else to release my anger on but her. And so I would just spew all this anger, just all this mean stuff on her. And I broke up with her once I was able to walk. And I remember her crying. She was just crying. She kind of was in my apartment and slid down the wall and sat on the floor. And I told her to get out of my apartment, and she left. And I remember a couple months later, I felt the same voice that told me to join the military, told me to take her back, and I did. And when I went to before I left to Kodiak, Alaska, for for survival training out there. I forgot what it's called, winter training, cold weather training. That's when she took me to the airport out in North Island, and I remember there's a SEAL, another SEAL named Todd Wells, and she had dropped me off, and then she tried to give me a kiss, and I wanted, because I didn't want to kiss her in front of my other guys in my class, I didn't in front of other guys, and so she just went away, and she was crying, and Todd Wells came up to me. He's like, "Dude, you need to stop being a dick, man." He was just like, "That girl is so good to you. Like, it's not cool. Like, you think that what you're doing is cool, but it's not cool, and she's gonna leave you one day." Like, I don't find, and I'll never forget that conversation he had with me. And when I got out to Kodiak, Alaska, I just remember just being away from technology, being away from everything, doing these long land navigation hikes by myself. Because as you know, going out there, you have to stay alone. You can't partner up with anybody. And I just remember just having time to reflect, and it was like somebody was holding up a mirror and showing me what I had become, and showing me what I had done to my mom, to other people, to my brother, to this girl, and I just remember being disgusted by it. I just didn't like what I saw, and I made the decision while I was out there that I'm going to turn my life around when I get back, and I'm going to marry this girl. I'm not going to be a dick anymore. And it was too late. She had already made the decision to leave me. While I was having that awakening, she went to a party, and she ran into an old coworker of hers who was married to a SEAL. And the coworker asked her, she said, "Hey, I heard you're dating a guy who's about to go into the teams. How is it?" And she was like, "Oh, it's okay." She said, "You need to leave him." She said, "Why?" She's like, "I'm married to it." She's like, "I'm married to a SEAL. If it's bad now, it's going to be worse later." And that's what finally gave her the strength to leave me. And so, while I was having my awakening, she had her awakening, and then she left me, and that kind of crushed me, humbled me even more so. And that's what kind of led me to God, man, led me to church, and said, I need something bigger than myself to kind of change me, because, joining the military, yeah, that's great and that's admirable, but the old me was still in me, and the old me had to get pulled out of me, and so that's kind of how it all happened. In short. Yeah.
And but you even went a step further, where I don't know what the right term is exactly, but kind of like a pastor or something.
Yeah,
like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I was a youth pastor. And and then a lay leader for my platoon. So when we were deployed, if we weren't opping on Wednesdays, I was leading Bible study. If we weren't opping on Sundays, I was leading church, and then just progressed from there. Even to this day, I preach at my church a couple times a year, and other churches as well. So yeah.
What eventually led you to acting? What got you into that? Because it's reading it, right? It was a little bit of a reluctant thing, where it was like you got a starring role in a play or something, where it was like, I don't really want to do this, but
I didn't want to do it. Yeah. Yeah, no, it was I tell people all the time, people ask me like, how do I get into Hollywood, especially now being a writer, director in the business, and meet a lot of people who, want to be writer directors and make movies. And they say, how did you do it? How'd you get in? And I tell them, I was like, I didn't get into it. It got into me. Like it found me. I didn't find it. I had no desire to be in Hollywood. And then, I got the phone call for that play, and then kind of left it all alone, and was in grad school getting my master's in business. And then fast forward, I get the phone call to work on Transformers. And one day turned into 3 weeks, 3 weeks turned into 6 months. And I realized how much I love storytelling. At the time, especially at the time when I was writing the book, I really felt like the path was just acting. And I've done a lot of other acting stuff. I've done a couple of the Michael Bay films, worked on Terminalist and a bunch of other stuff. But I really realized, as time went on, that, I've been a writer. I love writing. I wrote Transform. I didn't have a ghostwriter. I didn't have a co-writer. I wrote that by myself. I wrote my fiction thriller series behind me, Chameleon. I'm writing book 2 of that now. I've written screen. So I realized that I'm a storyteller and I want to be able to tell stories. And so it all started with that. You know, somebody gave me an opportunity and said, hey, show up on this time if you're interested. And I said, all right, why not? Checked it out and turned into this career. So that's kind of how it all came about.
Yeah. So talk about the book. Like, at what point did you say to yourself, I need to write a book, or someone else said, I need to write a book about the story?
Yeah. You know, that's another crazy story. I was, went on the Today Show to promote Transformers.
Okay.
I was in that film, Transformers 5. And Kathy Lee Gifford, who I'd become really, really good friends with, her and her family. She was the host of the Today Show at the time. And on the show, she said, you need to write a book. Your book needs to be a movie. And I was like, I ain't gonna do that. And then when we got backstage, she was like, I'm really serious. Like, you need to write a book. And I was like, nah, you know, I mean, you know, the deal in the community, how it is with guys writing books. And I said, you know, I just don't want to cross that line. And she said, why? And I said, oh, because to explain to her, you know, the code we have in the teams. And she said, I get that, right? But I know you want to be writing a book to like talk about missions and all that stuff. I know you'd be writing a book to share your story. And she said, as long as you just share your story and with the focus of trying to inspire people, then it should be fine. And I let that sit with me for a while, but she didn't let it sit with me because like 5 minutes later, she called up her publisher and she said, you need to sign this guy to a book deal right now, or I'm taking him to another publisher. So that's kind of how it all came about, man. Yeah, that's how I got the Transform book deal, man.
This episode is brought to you by Protekt, a veteran-owned company dedicated to wellness and quality. If you struggle with sleep, check out Protekt Rest, a natural anti-anxiety sleep supplement designed to help you relax, sleep through the night, and wake up refreshed. Unlike melatonin, it's free from drowsiness and hormone disruption and is non-habit forming. It's also safe to use alongside other medications. Our producer swears by it. After years of relying on melatonin, she found Protekt Rest provided even better sleep. So if you'd like to try Protekt Rest, go to protekt.com/onthex. That's protekt.com/ONTHEX. And then how do you transition into fiction writing? Because I'll be honest, I haven't read your fiction novel.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it until kind of like a couple of days ago when I was reviewing the notes for this, and I was like, oh, you've got a fiction novel too? That's a big transition, because I think there's a lot of people out there that can write well enough, or write certainly with a ghostwriter or something like that, right? They can write a nonfiction thing, especially if it's kind of their story or what maybe. Writing fiction is a completely different animal, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I wouldn't even know where to start to go about something like that. So how did you, again, is this something you just figured out, hey, I'm actually naturally really good at this, or did you have to work at it or take classes or something? How does that?
Well, you know, I did take classes, but not like traditional classes. I got masterclass.com, a subscription. Interestingly, I'm in Masterclass now. My episodes, my series released today from masterclass.com, but I remember getting a subscription to Masterclass and doing the Aaron Sorkin writing class and the Shonda Rhimes writing class and all of those. And then I would watch YouTube. Even to this day, when I work out, like I was working out today, I don't listen to music. I listen to filmmaking YouTube channels and screenwriting YouTube channels as I'm working out, and just to kind of, you know, keep current, so to speak. And so how it started for me, after I wrote my book Transform, I would get these scripts I started consulting on movies and TV shows, and I would get the scripts and I'll read it, and I was just like, man, these scripts suck. Like this writing is just horrible. And I'm reading the scripts where somebody got paid $200,000-$500,000 to write the script, sometimes $1 million to write the script. I'm like, somebody got paid $1 million to write this, but I could do this way better than whoever got paid $1 million to do this. And because I would get these scripts to read in order to consider doing the job. And that's when I was like, I'm going to teach myself screenwriting. And, you know, I know I've written a book. I'm sure if I write a book, I can teach myself screenwriting. So that's kind of how it all started. My very first script was actually Chameleon, which is that book right there.
Yeah.
And I wrote the script, and long story short, my agent read it, loved it, sign me off of that script and sign me off of another script I wrote called The Last Shall Be First, which is a screenplay based on a true story about the first group of African Americans to serve as special operations. And my agent shopped the Chameleon script around, and I ended up getting a deal with a major studio and a major production company with that first script I wrote, Chameleon. And that's kind of how it started. I would say me writing fiction didn't start with me writing a fiction book. It actually started with me writing fiction screenplays. And that has kind of, that. So when I came to start writing the Chameleon book, I remember my agent, my publishing agent said, "Hey, I want you to just take the screenplay and stretch it out into a book." And I was like, "No, I don't want to do that. I would rather I want the screenplay to be a sequel to the book, and I want the book to be a prequel to the screenplay." So I already had the foundation. So I had to kind of reverse engineer it and go back and say, okay, if this is where the characters are in the screenplay, where is the main character where was the main character 6 months ago? And let's start it there. And that's kind of how I did it. So I would say to answer your question, it all started how I got into being able to write fiction books started with me writing fiction screenplays.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then also I've written some nonfiction screenplays. I got the screenplay that got me into the WGA, which is the Writers Guild of America, which is the union that governs all Hollywood screenwriters, was a project called Slave Stealers, and that was an adaptation of a nonfiction book about Harriet Jacobs. And so I've written nonfiction screenplay. Actually, Transformed has gotten picked up to be a movie. So I wrote that screenplay.
Yeah.
And that was easy because I was now just adapting the book to a script.
So what's next for you at this point? We're new books coming out, more screenplays? Are you making a run at politics
directing
at some point? Is there something else on the horizon for you that's like a new channel or a new avenue, or is it just kind of keeping with that?
Yeah, no. So now, directing the screenplays that I've written. So I'm big into human trafficking, and I have a short film that I wrote and directed called The Unexpected. People could go watch it now. It's based on a true story around an international organ harvesting ring. And that short film got picked up to be a feature film. As a matter of fact, as we've been on the Zoom, I've been getting text messages from the producers on that film. And so we're looking at, we hire our casting director Thursday, which is really, really big casting directors, cast a bunch of big blockbuster films. And then hopefully we can be in production on that film in 2025, first quarter, second quarter, 2025. But that film, again, is based on true events around the international organ harvesting ring. And it's a sequel to the short film that I wrote and directed that's on YouTube now. And this shirt right here is Benevolent Savages. It's from my apparel company, Kejo. And we kind of intertwined human trafficking. It's an anti-human trafficking shirt that we put out. So a portion of each shirt sold goes to support human trafficking nonprofits in the fight against human trafficking. So right now, that whole human trafficking world is what I'm focusing on from a storytelling standpoint. But then, yes, I'll hopefully be directed Transform after that, or there's another film that I've been offered to direct. So we'll see what happens there.
Wow, man, you're a busy man. You got a lot going on, dude.
Yeah.
I gotta go in a few here, but a couple last things here. Because of all this success, actually, I want to kind of go back to that some part of that transformation that you had is what do you do, or how do you stay humble in the face of all that, right? In the face of all the success, right, with the book and the movies and all that. Do you think about that? How do you?
Oh, 100%.
How do you do it?
The way I stay humble is very simple. I remember what it was like to get crushed when I wasn't humble. It's that simple. 2 years ago, when I was having a lot of success, I lost. It started to get to my head a little bit. I wasn't full out of crazy, prideful, but it's internally and just my reaction to things. And I would just say from this, when I would get an offer to deal for a project, whether it was a writing project or whether it was a movie or whatever, instead of saying humbly accepting that deal, I'd be like, no, give me double. Give me double. Or I want thing, even when it came to certain release dates, I was, instead of saying, yeah, I'll just humbly accept that release date. I would fight to be like, no, it should be this date because looking at the analytics and yada, 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 like it should release this date because this is going to give us the best opportunity to sell more, yada, yada, yada. So I would fight with my partners on stuff. And so that was the type of pride that I was exuding at the time. It wasn't like, hey, look at me. It was more like, I know it needs to be this way because I know better. It was that type of pride. And I ended up losing, like, I remember in 1 month, I lost $1 million in deals. And that was crushing. That was very, very crushing. And so just thinking back to the times that pride started to get out of hand, and what happened and how I was crushed when it did, that's what keeps me humble.
Yeah.
That's what keeps me humble, man.
Last question here is, as you think back on like your whole journey, like that whole arc, what are the biggest lessons learned you take away from it that you would pass on to other people that are in similar circumstances, whether it's growing up in a place where they're, they're underprivileged, or they potentially don't have the opportunities that other people have, or they're in a situation where there's seemingly like, an obstacle they can't overcome, or what it may be.
The biggest thing I try to tell people is everything you need to succeed is already within you or within your reach. That's just the biggest thing. And especially looking back on my story, like everything that I needed to succeed has always either been within me or within my reach. And my story and what I've gone through in the past, unbeknownst to me, was always preparing me for the next step. Nothing was in vain. Like every rejection that I faced has prepared me for rejection today. And so that's just something that I try to tell young people, especially young people in the inner city who come from where I come from, say, oh, well, like I can't do this without. Like, no. Everything that you need to succeed is already within you or within your reach. You just have to do the work and look for it. Right? You just have to do the work and look for it. You can't make excuses. It's so easy to look at what you perceive is not in your reach and say, oh, see, I can't do it because of this. I can't do it because I live in the hood, or I can't do it because I go to this school. It's easy to see that, but it's hard to actually do the work and say, you know what? I may live in this bad neighborhood, but where's the closest library? That's within your reach. I can go to the library and study, or I can go, get free books from Goodwill. Like, I can go, do like everything we need to succeed. We live in America. Like, I'm just so to believe, especially coming from Nigeria and seeing how it doesn't matter how much work you put in Nigeria, in my opinion, like you could still end up at the bottom. Like, that's not the way it is in America. In America, it's like in my opinion, 1 + 1 = 2. If you really put in the work, if you really discipline yourself and you utilize what's within your reach or within you, you can make it. You can be successful. And so that's the biggest thing I try to leave with people. There are no excuses,
Yeah. Love it. I think that's a great message to end it on, man. It's perfect. So
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me on. And thanks for all the work you guys do with the Navy SEAL Foundation, and keep crushing it over there, man.
Thanks, brother. Will do. Thanks for listening to On the X, the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation, and an IRONCLAD original series sponsored by Mechanics Wear. You can learn more about the foundation at NavySealFoundation.org. You can also text the word On the X to 60104 to join our text subscriber list. See you next time.